Hello and welcome to MAGA the podcast. This is your host, the disgusted American, and this is not your QAnon loving nephew's MAGA. When we talk about MAGA, we're talking about I'm an angry asshole, the cult of Donald Trump. Our mission is to reveal how Don the Con bamboozled a nation. Our goal is to help make sure that the cult of MAGA goes down in flames by 2028. We want to stop it before MAGA becomes an unstoppable force and our democracy decays into a dictatorship. We have new examples of this for every episode. This time around, we're going to be talking about the power of disinformation. And not too long ago, we saw the president of Ukraine get ambushed in the White House by Trump and Vance. Gave them an excuse to cut military support to Ukraine by trying to frame the president of Ukraine as being ungrateful for American support. And simultaneously, while this was happening, a huge effort was being put out to position Russia as the victim of Ukrainian aggression. So there was this big retroactive push being made by the White House congressional Republicans to literally try to remake recent history, things that happened only a few years ago. And frankly, if you don't remember it happening live, you did a little bit of research, it'd take about 5 minutes to disprove this notion that Ukraine attacked Russia. But the problem with cults is that cult members don't bother to check things out. The reason is because whatever the cult leader says is true, no matter what. So again, if you want the cult of MAGA to end, we have to know how it began and why it spread, which means we have to go back to Trump 1.0 and especially look into and examine why the cult of MAGA began and why it spread. When it comes to who am I and why am I leading this journey? As I mentioned a moment before, my name is the Disgusted American, and there are a couple of things I bring to the table when it comes to this conversation. Essentially, I'm a talented storyteller and social doctor. I was in the development programs at a couple of the major networks, and I have about 18 years as a management consultant dealing with all kinds of social problems that come from people, systems, and power. So what I'm hoping to do is help us make sense of this MAGA mess via my strengths of storytelling and problem solving so we can sort out how to get out of this. In our last episode, we discussed the fact that despite Trump having a really potent snake oil recipe, he still needed to figure out a way to spread the word. Because in the 2016 presidential election, it was considered to be the strongest field of Republicans ever. When you have a field of 17 candidates, how do you stand out? Trump needed someone to help him refine and spread his message. And during this time, Breitbart News had risen to new heights under Steve Bannon. It had morphed into a very popular rage incubator that trained people to essentially believe outrageous headlines with no proof, and it brought the racist ideas of the alt-right from the fringes to the mainstream. So essentially, Trump needed a megaphone, and Breitbart needed a cult leader. It was a political love connection that dramatically changed the trajectory of American history. So in this episode, the big question that we are going to answer is what happened when Trump got his megaphone and Bannon got his Messiah. We're going to take a deeper dive into how Bam Bam and Trump wound up eloping and started their political marriage over the flaming corpse of Megyn Kelly. As we transition into this week's episode, I'd like to share with you a story about disinformation and why it matters. Way back on January 20th, 1944, a new group of troops known as the 23rd Headquarters was activated by the U.S. Army. And this crew was unique and top secret. They had a few really interesting quirks. First of all, they had artillery that couldn't fire. They had tanks that couldn't move. And its members were more talented at wielding paintbrushes than guns. The members of this top secret unit, which there were about 1,100 men, were artists, advertising men, radio broadcasters, sound experts, actors, architects, set designers, engineers, and photographers. Sprinkle in a few West Point graduates that were assigned to the group, and you have what was informally known as the Ghost Army, said to have one of the highest IQs in the Army with an average of 119. So who was the Ghost Army? They were the first mobile, multimedia, tactical deception unit in U.S. Army history. In an exhibit in the National World War II Museum entitled Ghost Army, they were described as the combat con artist of World War II. And these talented combat con artists really did help to win the war. They did this by establishing and staging elaborate ruses that fooled the forces of Nazi Germany about the location and size of Allied forces. From D-Day to the Battle of the Bulge, the Ghost Army performed more than 20 missions throughout the European theater in both 1944 and 1945. How did these talented combat con artists do it? They employed inflatable decoys, fake radio chatter, and loudspeakers that blared sound effects. With all of these tools, the Ghost Army could simulate a force 30 times its size. Years later, a U.S. Army report declared that rarely, if ever, has there been a group of such a few men which had so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. So these guys basically had to use imagination and illusion to trick the enemy and save thousands of Allied lives. They did this with inflatable tanks and vehicles, fake radio traffic, sound effects, even phony generals. They had camouflage artists that used gasoline-fueled air compressors to inflate rubber tanks, jeeps, trucks, artillery, and aircraft. They had artists that painted authentic details on these vehicles that were realistic enough to deceive Nazi aerial recon. Their radio specialists sent out misleading communications and even mimicked radio operators' unique styles to add authenticity to their fake reports. Their sound engineers blared pre-recorded sounds of military drills and movements on enormous speakers that sometimes could be heard from as far away as 15 miles. This group was capable of simulating 2 whole divisions, upwards of 30,000 men, with visual, sonic, and radio deception. They were able to fool professional German soldiers into believing that a huge army was right around the corner. One of the last surviving members of the unit talks about the impact of Ghost Army.
What was it like being in the Ghost Army?
Ninth Army crossed the Rhine River. We used 400 of those tanks in that operation.
And it was all fake. And the Germans would think, well, there they are, so let's move over here. When the real army was over here.
Inflatable tanks?
Yeah. To make the Germans think they were going to attack somewhere else.
Their job was to attract the enemy to them.
I can't believe the tanks only weighed 91 pounds. And you had to keep it quiet for over 50 years.
In their most famous mission, the Ghost Army was able to convince the Germans that 40,000 troops, along with heavy armor, was amassed 10 miles south of the Rhine River. Radio chatter spread false reports about their intended movements, and sonic trucks blasted a soundtrack of pontoon bridge construction, artillery fire, and even officers swearing. The Ghost Army stenciled fabricated division numbers and insignias onto their vehicles. They even erected phony headquarters and command posts that were manned by fake commanders and generals. They sewed counterfeit shoulder patches onto their uniforms and boisterously discussed their false intelligence in local bars and cafes to ensure that this disinformation would be overheard by lurking Nazi spies. And the ruse worked. When the Nazis attacked the Ghost Army, the Ninth Army crossed the Rhine with little resistance. Over the campaigns of 2 years, Ghost Army lost 3 of their members, and approximately 30 more were wounded. But the military estimates the Ghost Army saved the lives of somewhere between 15 and 30,000 American servicemen. And we never heard about these guys because their missions and their operations were classified top secret and were not released for more than 50 years after their exploits in 1996. The Ghost Army worked by luring people with sound, noise, and lots of smoke and mirrors. They convinced the enemy that you were over here when you really planned to attack over there. This is the power of disinformation. So since around 2012 or so, Bannon started to host his very own American Idol for assholes. And before Trump, he was courting Sarah Palin, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson, right?
Crazy. You know, we had Palin in 8 and hoped that she had run in 12, and she just, it just didn't work out. I actually worked with Lou Dobbs and tried to get Lou Dobbs to run in 12 as a populist, because it was Lou Dobbs' economic ideas on his TV show all the time, particularly China and immigration and trade. And Lou Dobbs, for a host of reasons, didn't do it. And here, I actually tried to talk Sessions into doing it. I told Sessions, just like I told Palin, you're not going to be president of the United States.
However, the tone of Breitbart News Network, their abrasive, outrage-inducing way of reporting the news, started to really mirror the tone of Trump's campaign. Douchebags of a feather flocking together. And during the presidential campaign, traffic really started to spike. So the website started to align themselves with the billionaire real estate mogul early on. And they got to the point where employees began to raise concerns that Breitbart was little more than a fan club for Donald and began to serve as a clearinghouse for attacks on Trump's adversaries and sometimes even his friends.
Well, scrutiny surrounding Lewandowski was at its most intense when then Breitbart reporter Michelle Fields filed a police report for battery on the former Trump campaign manager after she says Lewandowski grabbed her arm, which the video clearly shows him doing.
In March 2016, a Breitbart reporter, Michelle Fields, was attacked by Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. And rather than back up Michelle Fields, they threw her under the bus.
I do feel vindicated. I think that when you're a bad person, you do bad things, eventually there are consequences. And I feel like with Corey, he finally, there's finally consequences for what he did. He defamed me, he lied, and he really shook my life. I lost my job. There were also lots of threats. So I'm happy to see that there is some justice. Mm-hmm.
She was fired for being assaulted by a member of the Trump campaign. Bannon and Trump started to fall into a gravitational orbit, and they had commonalities to build from. Bannon also went to Ivy League school, got into Harvard. He survived by his own wits at Goldman Sachs and Hollywood. And there was this idea that Trump would really connect with him, see him as a deal maker, someone who spoke his language, someone who was comfortable with other moguls, and somebody that had really straightforward, basic ideas that would work in a political campaign. Trump loved Breitbart, and Bannon ran Breitbart. He was also Roger Stone approved. Roger Stone described him as a bomb thrower and a king of new media. Now, one side note on this connection around Ivy League schools, Bannon actually got into Harvard on his own merit. He didn't bullshit his way in like Donald Trump. Donald Trump likes to describe his time at Wharton as proof that he is a super genius. But the reality is that Trump's admission into Wharton didn't really come from merit, shockingly. he got into Wharton with a little help from his big brother and his father. So back in 1966, Fred Trump Jr., Donald's older brother, called his close friend James Nolan, who was working in Penn's admission office. In the Washington Post, Nolan reports Fred Trump calling him and saying, "Hey, you remember my brother Donald? He's at Fordham, and he would like to transfer to Wharton. Will you interview him?" So soon Donald Trump arrived at Penn for the interview, accompanied by his father, Fred Trump Sr., who sought to ingratiate himself. Nolan also reports that he was the only admissions official to talk to Trump, and he gave him a rating, but the final decision rested with his boss. Nolan also noted it wasn't really difficult to get into Wharton back in 1966. Your odds were higher than 50% if you were transferring from another school. He also stated, "I certainly was not struck by any sense that I'm sitting before a genius. Certainly not a super genius." And people that actually went to school with Trump, his classmates, describe him as a middling student. So again, Trump's bullshit story around DEI and how it's all about meritocracy apparently only applies to other people. When it comes to him personally, it wasn't about merit. It's about Big Brother and Daddy calling in favors. So these crazy kids eloped shortly after the first Republican national debate on August 6, 2015. For those of you that remember the debate, this is the one where Megyn Kelly hammered Trump. It's where he had the whole Rosie O'Donnell meltdown. And after Donald Trump had a tirade where he said Megyn Kelly was bleeding out of her wherever. Shortly after the debate, Breitbart decided to start attacking Megyn Kelly.
On August 1st, I think it was the debate when Fox News, when Murdoch and Ailes, or particularly Murdoch and Ailes, being the part of the Bush apparatus, decided they were going to kneecap Donald Trump right out of the box. And that's what Megyn Kelly, they went through his Twitter feed, they went through all the Apprentice tapes, they went through everything and came out and did a hit like the left would do on somebody. And that's when all war broke out. That's when Breitbart, that's when you had to choose sides.
They went after her like a pit bull. And Trump loved this.
When you get to the Fox situation, Fox has chosen a side. It's so evident in that debate that they're there to kneecap Donald Trump, okay? They're there to take him out. And that's when we go, okay, so we run 20 stories on Megyn Kelly. I get Tony Lee and Matt Boyle, my two hammers. They go right after Megyn Kelly. We're going to Linsky her, right? We're going to call her out from the herd and just hit her nonstop.
So on August 17th, 2016, Bannon was appointed chief executive of Donald Trump's presidential campaign.
All right, Sam, thank you. And breaking news this morning, Republican Donald Trump is overhauling his campaign again.
Overnight, we learned Trump is bringing in Breitbart News' Stephen Bannon as a campaign CEO and promoting one of his pollsters to campaign manager. The move comes just 82 days before the election and represents Trump's second campaign shakeup in 2 months. In a phone interview, Trump says that he's known both people for a long time. Opinion surveys show Trump trailing his Democratic rival Hillary Clinton nationally and in key battleground states.
Besides running Trump's campaign, Steve Bannon is most widely known for being the CEO of Breitbart News, a website Bannon himself describes as a platform for the alt-rights. All right, these are the kind of people who think Fox News is too diverse. Breitbart is infamous for writing articles that are misogynistic, anti-Semitic, and outright racist. And Bannon's appointment to the White House has really energized a certain section of people in America. The white nationalist Richard Spencer tweeted that Mr. Bannon was in the best possible position to influence policy. And former KKK wizard David Duke called the choice excellent. Yeah, honestly, the Klan is so happy they've even jazzed up their hoods. And Bannon may say that he's not one of these people, but he happily provides them a megaphone.
The political marriage between Donald Trump and Steve Bannon had officially begun. Bannon's job with the campaign was to perfect and amplify the snake oil.
He says, what's your percentage? And I've told him from the day I've taken this job on and you have 100% metaphysical certitude that you will win if you just stick to this populist nationalist message and hang her as the representatives of the elite. We hang that around her, that she represents the elite, you represent the people, you're a populist, and we hammer, you're going to win. I don't care if you're 16 down. It doesn't matter. The key number is 70% of the people think America's in decline. You're going to return America to her former glory.
He knew Trump was not a policy guy, but he also recognized that Trump could dominate his political opponents in a way that most politicians couldn't.
What to do is just hit, and keep it. It's momentum.
And Trump realized that he could use Bannon's ideas to knock out his political rivals in what was considered the strongest Republican presidential field ever. Their pitches were simple. They were full of bravado. You might recall some of the greatest hits. Drain the swamp, lock her up, build the wall. When Bannon talked to journalist Michael Lewis about all this in February 2018, he said, we got elected on drain the swamp, lock her up, and build a wall. That was pure anger. And anger and fear is what gets people to the polls. Goes right back to our story of War of the Worlds, right? Anger and fear. When people are angry and afraid, they turn off their thinking caps. They don't check things out. They just believe what they are told. And so these things that Trump is doing again here in Trump 2.0, his greatest hits are blasts from the past. He's recycling the same garbage. But now we have to react to it differently because it's worked twice now. This isn't a fluke. So the reality is that to win again, 26 and 2028, Democrats are going to have to learn how to fight in the gutter, where the war against MAGA will have to be won. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, in the aftermath of the 2016 election, Bannon compared his influence with Trump to that of Thomas Cromwell in the court of the Tudors.
One of the most controversial Tudor figures and one of the most disliked by some has to be Thomas Cromwell. During the reign of Henry VIII, he served as the chief minister to the king and was one of the strongest and most powerful orchestrators of the Reformation. He was a key political manipulator, and his mindset would play well to the king, and he grew incredibly close to Henry VIII. He had a rather visceral rise to power, but his downfall was equally as drastic. His execution and death was one that Henry VIII later regretted, and the king mourned the loss of his chief minister and friend.
So a little side note on the Thomas Cromwell story. He was executed at the end. I don't think Bannon really likes to talk about that part, but he was executed for treason and heresy. So officially, he was executed for treason and heresy. Unofficially, he was executed because Henry VIII was pissed off that Cromwell didn't pick a hot wife for him. Cromwell had picked someone, and in order to find out whether or not she was cute, he had to send out someone to paint her picture. Because back in ye old golden days, that's how you found out if a girl was cute or not. You sent a dude to paint her, and then 6 months later, you got a picture back. And Henry VIII felt as if this picture was way too flattering as compared to the real thing. So he was pissed off. And if you're the king of England and accuse your wingman of having beer goggles, then off with his head. Poor Thomas Cromwell was executed because he didn't pick a cute girl for Henry VIII. There you go. You know, there's the thing about authoritarians. They do crazy shit because they can, which is really a great reason for us not to have Trump become a dictator. If he's this unhinged when he's just the president, what's going to happen if he gets all this power that he's trying to consolidate right now? Does anybody think he's going to become more reasonable? Does anybody think he's not going to try to become president for life? Come on, folks. Authoritarians, dictators, they want it all. And no matter how much they get, they want more. Which is why boundaries are important. You have to stop folks who keep pushing because otherwise you don't stop pushing ever. So in this episode, we explored why Trump and Bannon joined forces and some of the biggest legacies of the Bannon-Trump marriage back in the 2016 campaign. Things such as fear and anger being primary motivators. In the next episode, part 3 of Bam Bam's Big Idea, we're going to take a deeper dive into another really important legacy from Steve Bannon that still haunts us to this day. Bannon felt the best way to deal with the media that he hated so much was to flood the zone with shit. He stated during Trump 1.0, the media can only, because they're dumb and they're lazy, they can only focus on one thing at a time. So thanks again for tuning in. That's all we've got for this week. If you want to help out the channel, again, subscribe or follow us on your favorite platform and tell your fellow disgusted Americans or our disgusted international friends all about us, where they can find us. Be great if we could help spread the word on the channel so we can get more folks tuning in. Again, new episodes drop on Wednesday. Look forward to talking to you all again next week. Have a great night. Ciao, bacalao.